Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's podcast from Sports and Leisure. It's our This Day in Sports History Look Back. This is where we go back and look at this week's sports history posts. I'm here with my good friend Clayton. How you doing, Clayton?
I am doing excellent. Well, it was Selection Sunday today, so just getting geared up for everything that's going to happen Tuesday through the next Sunday.
I love March Madness. I can't wait. I'm frantically trying to figure out time when I'm going to do all my picks this coming week, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, you don't have a whole lot of time because Tuesday is first four in Dayton.
Yeah, it's always a mad dash for me to get those picks in, but I always do it every year because I love it so much. Also today, big event. What was that?
A World Baseball Classic semifinals. Team USA into the final, and they will either play Venezuela or Team Italy. Team Italy, also known as Team USA's B team, because just about all of them are from the U.S. anyway. So you got Team USA A team, Team USA B team, and Venezuela.
I was just thinking how exciting that game was. 2-1 score. A lot of superstars, both lineups. A lot of drama. It was, the whole game was pretty much one or two pitches away from either tying it up or someone taking the lead. And I wish that the All-Star game could be that exciting.
Well, the thing that's funny about that, Jeff, is that this is sort of what we all dreamed All-Star games would be. And we saw that in the Olympics with Team USA, Team Canada. Don't we wish that the NHL All-Star game would be played at that level? Don't we wish the NBA All-Star game was played at that level? The Major League Baseball All-Star game is about as close as you get to an actual game now. Yeah. And I think that's why the Major League Baseball game has been as popular or more popular than any of the other All-Star games, because with the exception of a new pitcher every inning, it's basically like a regular game. Although we're getting to the point where a new pitcher every inning is kind of normal anyway.
Hey, we had Paul Skeens go, 5 innings today? That was pretty
nice. He went into the fifth. He didn't quite make it through 5.
Yeah, that's right.
He could have if Turang hadn't dropped the ball in the double play and cost him those extra pitches. But it all worked out in the end.
Yeah. So great game, though. Really enjoyed it. So just for the audience, so they know for our podcast today, we're going to jump around a little bit on the days of the week. But overall, we want to talk about just all the different posts that we have been making throughout the week, starting from Monday. We're recording this on Sunday. And for those watching, if you want to go back and check our socials and look at a little more detail on these history posts, if something piques your interest, I encourage you to go back and like and share and comment and spread the word, because I know I love sharing history, Clayton. I know you love sharing history, and really looking forward to it. All right, so let's jump in. We're going to actually go to the 11th, which was Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, Wednesday this week. And we posted about St. John winning the Big East tournament. It was their first. This was in the year 2000. It was their first win since 1986. And so just a little bit of background on that. So in that tournament, St. John's defeated UConn 80-70. It was held at Madison Square Garden. And it was their first Big East win since 1986, as I mentioned. They were seeded number 3. They beat Villanova 75-70 in the quarterfinals. Then upset number 2, Miami, 58-57 in the semis, before it set up a third meeting with UConn. A really interesting thing about that is that, everyone says it's really hard to beat a team 3 times in the season. Well, St. John's had beaten UConn twice, and I'm sure UConn felt pretty good because they were the winners of the previous season's Big East tournament where they faced St. John's. But it wasn't to be. St. John's won and really was a new era for that program, or maybe it wasn't. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's perfect symmetry because earlier today in the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden, St. John's beat UConn.
Yeah, and they won last year too, right?
Yeah, they did. And last year it was the culmination of a 25-year drought. Since they had won this game that we're talking about in 2000. And last year they beat Creighton in order to win the Big East. And it was sort of the feeling then in 2000 was very much like the feeling is now, that we're on the dawn and the precipice of a new era of St. John's basketball where it's really heading in the right direction. And what's crazy to me is that you think about St. John's, at least I do, as being one of the blue bloods in college basketball. And they're the seventh most winningest program in the history of the NCAA. But they got a big fat goose egg when it comes to national championships. And that's, I think, surprising to a lot of people that they've only been to 2 Final Fours and they've been to, 0 championships when it comes to the NCAA for a program that's won that many times and was relevant really in the 80s and the dawn of the beginning of the Big East Conference, and really fell on amazingly hard times once Lou Carnesecca was gone.
Yeah, since 2000, they've really had only 6 appearances at the NCAA. They haven't even made it past the second round. So it's been pretty tough go for the program. And, they haven't really even produced that much big talent. I think Ron Artest is probably the most high-profile player that's come out of that school, at least recently. But you're right. I mean, they had back-to-back national championships back in the 40s, and then, as you said, in the 90s, at the beginning of the Big East, looked like they were going to be one of the big powerhouses. But I think one of the big challenges they have is so much of their talent gets poached from the area that they would draw from New York City, Kentucky, Duke. A lot of those big high-profile schools poach their talent. So is that really what their struggle is, that they just can't really keep the area talent coming into their program?
Right. That's a huge part of it, is that there are 2 types of New York City players. There are the ones that don't ever want to leave home, and there's the ones that want to get out as soon as they turn 18 and leave. And there's been a lot more recently that want to get out. And when you look at what are your real options if you want to stay in New York City, it's St. John's.
Right.
That's it. Because if you look at the other teams that are in the city, Manhattan, that is a small conference. Fordham, small conference. Columbia, Ivy League, small conference. Wagner, not only is it a small conference, it's also Staten Island. Who wants to go to Staten Island? Generally in New York City, not a lot of people go to Staten Island. And it's a tiny conference. Long Island University, Hofstra. They're all small schools. Even if you go across the river, Monmouth, small college, SUNY Stony Brook, upstate, it's small conference. You've got Rutgers and you've got Seton Hall if you want to go to New Jersey, if you're a New York City player. But it makes the allure of Duke and Kentucky and North Carolina and these other programs that come in, even Syracuse, that come in and grab these kids out in New York City. You can't really have a...
I was wondering... Go ahead.
I was going to say, you can't really have a conversation about St. John's and what happened, under Mike Jarvis back in 2000 without really talking about Fran Fraschilla, who was the coach prior to him, who was 2 coaches after Lou Carnesecca. So Lou Carnesecca, for all of those who are new to St. John's, he was really the program. If you think about coaches that are there for a long period of time that develop and are the creators of a program, and you think about St. John's really beginning at the beginning of the Big East, which is 1980, and then you have Lou Carnesecca going all the way into the early 90s, and he was that program. He was Mike Krzyzewski. He was Jim Boeheim. He was Roy Williams, those coaches that are there for a very long time that really built a program. And once he was gone, they struggled to find an identity. And Brian Mahoney came in. He did almost nothing. They had no success with him because playing for Lou Carnesecca was really what it was about. It was about the coach. We're going to go there and we're going to play for the coach. And then, when he was gone, they brought in Fran Fraschilla, and Fran Fraschilla had a lot of New York ties. He was at Manhattan prior to being at St. John's, and he had a connection with all of those New York high school coaches, and he had a really good relationship with them because most of the 1, 2, 4, or the 5-star, 4-star guys, the number 1, number 2 players on any given New York City high school team, they were being fought over, and the coach's attention was being fought over, and loyalties were being fought over from Duke, North Carolina, Syracuse, all the big programs. But Fran Fraschilla had a great relationship with all these guys because he wasn't there for the top number one, top number two player because he was at Manhattan. So he was there for the third guy, the fourth guy, the fifth guy, and he developed all these really great relationships within that New York City area that he was going to bring those great players to St. John's and really build St. John's. And when he got fired after 2 seasons, that put a damper on everything that they thought that they were going to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking at the list of coaches that really, over the last, 20 years or so, and they've gone through 8 coaches, and I'm a moderate basketball fan. I think I'm, I keep up. I'm not a diehard, but I'm probably somewhere in between a casual and a diehard. And I recognized all the coach names, Rick Pitino, Chris Mullen, Steve Lavin, Fran Fraschilla, as you mentioned, Mike Jarvis. And so I found it interesting that with all these big names, recruiting probably shouldn't have been an issue. So yet they seem to be stuck in this rut of constantly having to replace their coach and have a new direction, and probably couldn't get any momentum going. And so it feels like some of the issues maybe they have is more structural, or it's more institutional. I think it was only until recently that they installed a really competitive 50,000 square foot practice facility. And it wasn't until around the early 2000s that they really 2020s that they got that in place, and that's goes a long way into really competing with some of these higher profile schools.
I think there's a number of factors when you look at St. John's and what happened after, this little run in 2000 where Fran Fraschilla was no longer there. So part of it is that when Mike Jarvis came in, he had success in, 99, the 98-99 season, 99-2000 season. And mostly that was because he had Fran Fraschilla's players. He had a really good roster in place. And you see, as the longer he was there, the worse the roster got. Because the only real big, huge player that Mike Jarvis had was Bootsy Thornton. And Bootsy Thornton, who we really carried the Mike Jarvis era after this year, he was a Fran Fraschilla guy. And he was so much of a Fran Fraschilla guy. I'm going to tell you a great story about Bootsy Thornton. So Bootsy Thornton was down.
I love your stories.
He was down in Baltimore, right? And Fran Fraschilla knew the Baltimore area really well. He recruited Baltimore all the time when he was at Manhattan. And Bootsy Thornton's high school coach didn't want him to go anywhere other than Manhattan to play for Fran Fraschilla, because he's like, he needs you in order to guide him. If he goes someplace else, it's going to be girls and it's going to be booze and it's going to be problem, right? He needs you to keep him in line. But Bootsy Thornton signed a national letter of intent to go somewhere else, right? And to this day, Fran Fraschilla and Bootsy Thornton will not say where that is, but it was one of the big ones. It was North Carolina. It was a series. It was a big one, right? So what his high school coach did was convinced Bootsy Thornton that he had to go to Manhattan. He had to go to Fran Fraschilla. Well, Fran Fraschilla got the St. John's job. He's like, well, now you got to go to St. John's, right? But he had already signed the national letter of intent. And it wasn't like it used to be where you could just rip it up and be like, oh, I'm not going there. You'd have to sit out, or you'd have to, all these things. Sure. It's not the NIL transfer portal era. So Bootsy Thornton purposely failed a class his senior year of high school so that he couldn't graduate, and he had to go back to high school in the fall to do this, thus nullifying and voiding his national letter of intent, so he could graduate before Christmas and then join St. John's in the end of this 99, the end of the last season of Fran Fraschilla. Wow. And Fran Fraschilla was like, I'm not going to play you. I'm not going to play you at all. I could play you. I'm not going to play you. I'm going to have you sit out because we're really building for next year. And then Fran Fraschilla gets fired at the end of that season after 2 years of being there. And Bucci Thornton was sort of stuck, and he was stuck with Mike Jarvis. And then they ended up getting Marcus Hatton, who was Bucci Thornton's best friend. And that was part of the deal. Like, you get Bucci Thornton, I'll get you Marcus Hatton, who's like the second best player in Baltimore. And they'll come up. So Mike Jarvis inherited both of those guys. And those were like his two big guys, but they're really Fran Fraschella's guys. So the combination of Mike Jarvis's inability to recruit, and once he started to run out of Fran Fraschella's guys, that was a problem. The second problem was the Big East started its demise. That started to be the end of the Big East as we know it. And football ruined the Big East. And before you knew it, Pittsburgh was gone, and Virginia Tech was gone, and Rutgers was gone, and Notre Dame was gone, and West Virginia was gone, and Cincinnati was gone, and then Syracuse was gone. And the Big East sort of became a shell of itself. And all of a sudden, these recruits that were like, hey, Big East that's a power conference. The Big East started to look like the A-10 for a handful of years. And that was when they had the problems of, well, how do we get people here? You know, let's go get Chris Mullen. He's St. John's royalty. He can build and rebuild this program. And it just didn't work for a very long time until they sort of rebuilt the Big East and made the Big East the fifth power conference that it is again today.
So I want to ask you a question before we move on. So if it was up to you, how would you rebuild a program like St. John's? Like, what if you were the athletic director? What would you do? What would be your approach?
Well, I think they did a really great thing in hiring Rick Pitino, because I said St. John's is one of those places that you need a couple of things. One, you need a flashy superstar coach that people will get excited about, because for as much as St. John's is the only college basketball attraction really in New York City, it is well down as an afterthought in terms of where people are willing and want to go and spend their entertainment dollar. You've got the Knicks, and you've got the Nets, and you got the Rangers, and you got the Islanders, and you got the Yankees, and you got the Mets, and you got Broadway, and you've got all of these things, and they get sort of lost in the shuffle. And if you look around the country, like look at Chicago, right? Mm-hmm. Northwestern is buried. Who talks about Northwestern? Even Los Angeles, who has UCLA and USC, two of the most important sports universities in the country, they're buried. Nobody talks about UCLA and USC. They're talking about the Lakers. They're talking about the Dodgers. They're talking about the Clippers, the Kings. It's anything but USC and UCLA on the scale that you're going to get if you go to Columbus and see how much they talk about Ohio State, or you go to anywhere in Mississippi and they're talking Ole Miss, Mississippi State. It rules everything that's going on. So I think they made a first decision is to make sure that they have a charismatic coach that can take all of the heat that you're going to get from the New York papers. That's Rick Pitino. He doesn't give a crap. He doesn't care what the New York Times writes about him. He doesn't care what the Post writes about him. He's a New York guy who has New York coach connections and can recruit and keep some of those guys around. The second thing you need to do as an institution is decide that basketball is going to be important to you. And that was part of the problem that Fran Fraschilla had, is that their athletic director and the president, the guy that ran things, was a priest. It was Father Harrington. He's not a basketball guy. He's not a sports guy. He spent most of his time in Hong Kong and in Rome at their other campuses, and then he would come back. And the reason that Fran Fraschilla got fired is because he had heard that Fran Fraschilla used curse words and yelled at kids at practice. And that's why he got fired. So not really the kind of person that you want running your athletic department. So I would want to get a nice, strong athletic director that understands what college basketball is now and what you're selling, and get a high profile coach just in the manner in which they're doing, because you have to sell that we're going to get you to the NBA. You can't sell, hey, you get to play at Madison Square Garden, because all of these premier programs, they get to play at Madison Square Garden. They get to play at the United Center. They get to play, in LA and Atlanta. They play at all these places anyway in these little tournaments. So that's what I would do. And I think they're on the right path. And as long as Rick Pitino stays there and wants to be there, I think they're in a really good spot. And I had called for years, Jeff, that Georgetown should rebuild their program by hiring Rick Pitino. I said UNLV should
Yeah, I
rebuild their
remember that.
program by hiring Rick Pitino. That you need that guy and that coach. St. John's got to him first,
Yeah.
and I think they're on the right path.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of Rick Pitino lately, probably because the Big East tournament, and he definitely has that personality that you feel like fits in New York.
Oh, for sure. He is a New York guy.
Yeah,
And that's something that you really you need to embrace it. You can't be one of those people that goes in and is sort of it's like the Karate Kid, right? Karate yes, okay, karate no, okay, karate so squish like grape.
right.
That's the way New York is. It's you're yes or you're no, but so
Yeah,
it doesn't resonate.
right. Well, speaking of, let's move to what we posted about on Tuesday, which was the
Okay.
10th in 1991, and talking about college coaches, legendary coaches. We wrote about Eddie Sutton and Oklahoma State.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually a really remarkable date in college sports because it was the first time that a college coach, and my understanding, the only time, Eddie Sutton took his fourth team to the NCAA tournament with an at-large bid, and his previous success was with Creighton, Arkansas, and Kentucky, and Sutton, who's just always known as a phenomenal coach. He's had 26 NCAA tournament appearances. His record over that time is 39-25, which is pretty good. And
Mm-hmm.
so, different personality from someone like Rick Pitino, but definitely someone who really made his presence known as a fantastic college coach that really transcended just what happened on the court.
Yeah, and what's crazy about Eddie Sutton, he took those, four universities to the NCAA tournament. He took Creighton, he took Arkansas, he took Kentucky, he took Oklahoma State. Rick Pitino came after him, behind him, and Rick Pitino took five. So it's kind of funny that they were on back-to-back days. But Eddie Sutton, you talk about a guy that understands New York City and Rick Pitino. Eddie Sutton is a guy that understands Oklahoma and understands Stillwater and understands that part of the world very well. And it's a specific type of player that you have to get that can come to Stillwater. And he was from Kansas, not too far from there, and he went to Oklahoma State. I'm sorry. And he was recruited by a number of teams in that area, and he really went to Oklahoma State because he wanted to play for Hank Iba. And Hank Iba, Hall of Fame coach, who was sort of the opposite of Rick Pitino. He wasn't a yeller and a screamer, and he was we're going to put your arms around and we're going to teach you about life, and we're going to use basketball as the vehicle in which we do that. And that is something that Eddie Sutton really carried forward his whole career. And he had a really, really cool, interesting life.
Yeah, I think the Eddie Sutton is really my kind of coach. The things that he emphasized are things that I love about basketball teams, and if I was going to be a basketball coach, these are the things that I would really focus on: is team sport, defense, minimizing turnovers, rebounds, limiting your opposition to just one attempt, right? Not giving them a second chance or third chance at the basket. And I think kind of what you talked about is sort of a teacher of life. All the coaches that really focus on the fundamentals and team concept of any sport, they're the ones who naturally kind of loop in life experiences because that mirrors so much of success in life as well. And so I think, it's no wonder that when he would take a program, like Oklahoma State, and he took it from sort of obscurity and almost immediately they were the team everyone was talking about. So I love that about him. I was really excited to be able to post about Eddie Sutton and just because I admire what he did so much.
And one of the things that's really cool about Eddie Sutton is that you think about Eddie Sutton, he's the country bumpkin from the farm, but he was really innovative in what he did, not just on the court, but off. When he had finished up at Oklahoma State, his last year of playing, his wife was a year younger than him, and she still had 1 year to get her degree, and so he wanted to stick around, and he didn't know what he was going to do. And Hank Iba was like, "Well, why don't you coach the freshman team?" It was just like Jim Valvano. He's 20 years old
Yeah.
and the kids he's coaching are 19. And he said, stick around, learn. And that was back when he had freshman teams and only the freshmen could play, and the freshmen couldn't play on varsity, and they needed a coach. So he stuck around and did that until they got married and she graduated. And then when he went to look for a job, he got a job at, let me make sure I get the college, Tulsa Central High School. And in order to be the head basketball coach, he also had to be the assistant football coach and the head golf coach.
Wow.
And he had to teach 5 history classes. But he's like, I want to be a coach, so this is what I will do. And he was there the first year that the Tulsa public high school system became integrated. And he was a central figure in taking in African-American players and integrating his team. Like, his team was probably the first integrated team in Tulsa. And he said that he found that he had never really been around a lot of African-Americans, nor had most of his players. But he said things went really smooth because the first thing that they realized is that they were all just people. And the white students had nothing to fear from the black students, and the black students had nothing to fear from the white students. And then when he went to Idaho Southern, which was his first college job, he was the first coach to integrate Idaho Southern, and really built his program around players that he had. He said when he moved to Twin Falls, Idaho, there were 4 African Americans in the entire city.
Oh, wow.
And the first thing he did was bring 2 from Tulsa Central High School. And he said everything went really great. And that was something that sort of framed his not just his recruiting, but his life view, that he would be willing to recruit, from anywhere. He'd recruit from big city, he'd recruit from, small town. It didn't matter. He felt comfortable sort of wherever he went. And it was funny because when he went to from Arkansas to Kentucky, the very first person was that showed up in his office and sort of became his friend and his and one of his golfing buddies.
Mm-mm.
Happy Chandler.
Oh.
The former baseball commissioner and former senator from Kentucky, the guy that integrated Jackie Robinson into Major League Baseball. And he said he'd always been an admirer of Eddie Sutton because of the way he handled his program at Southern Idaho and the way that he handled it at Arkansas, and they became buddies. And he said, Kentucky is a different animal. You're not a Kentucky guy, and so I'm going to hang out with you and make sure you learn how to be a Kentucky guy. And they became friends for life.
It's funny you mentioned that. I didn't know you were going to bring up this story, to be honest. And I'm wearing my Jackie Robinson shirt. It just shows how it's amazing with history. It's just things you don't realize that are all interconnected, and so that was a great story. Thanks for sharing.
It's funny too because when he first went to Arkansas, he didn't know anybody. He knew nobody when they got down to Arkansas, and everybody, they were like, "Don't take the Arkansas job. Like, don't leave Creighton. Don't take the Arkansas job." Bobby Knight was like, "Don't do it. Nobody can win in Arkansas. Don't do it." He's like, "Just hang out. Go to Creighton for another year. We'll get you a job in the Big Ten. We'll talk to people. We'll get you a job in the ACC. Don't go to Arkansas." And he's like, "No, I need to go to Arkansas. It's a bigger job. I'm going to Arkansas." So he went to Arkansas, and he didn't know anybody. And he went to a fundraiser, the faculty fundraiser, and met a law professor when he was at Arkansas. And the two of them became buddies, and they would play golf together. And he's like, this law professor, he didn't really know anything about basketball. So I came in, I taught him about basketball, and he would go and he would shag balls, he'd stand under the rim and when they were during shoot around and pass the balls out. And that fella, that law professor, went by the name of William Jefferson Clinton. He was buddies with Bill Clinton, who used to hang out at his practice, just because neither one of them knew anybody, and so they just became buddies at Arkansas. And he said when Bill Clinton became president, he was at the reception at the ball, and he said to Bill, "Bill, he's like, I just want you to remember there was a time that I was more famous than you."
That's a great story. That's awesome.
Yeah, so Eddie Sutton was cool. He ended up hanging out with Waylon Jennings when the Highwaymen were out. So he went on tour, and they went to a bunch of shows when he was hanging out with Johnny Cash and Chris Christopherson and Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings.
Yeah,
cool dude.
That's interesting, and it's you brought up Jim Valvano, and that's actually who I was thinking about a lot too when I was thinking about a Sutton and doing a little bit of research on a little more information on him, and I think there's really good examples because, and we talked a little bit about this when we've discussed Tom Izzo. It's like these are teachers of life, and
Mm-hmm.
these are people who, yes, it's about the sport, but it's about people, and like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that you know getting African American players to play with white players when maybe that's never happened before, and it's like because everyone just realized in the end we're all here for the same thing. We're all people, and we're all
Mm-hmm.
we all get along, and there's no reason we can't get along. And I think it's a really interesting um, observation there, and those stories are really poignant. So yeah, thanks for sharing those stories. It was a really fascinating background.
Yeah, no, he was really great,
Um,
and
I
and
did.
and he was said he was a real force in making that program relevant because they were not relevant before, and they have not been relevant since.
So talking about relevancy, let's move on to March 12th, where we talked about and we went back to 2005, uh, and this is with the Toronto Raptors in 2005 on March 12th. A 3-point make by Morris Peterson set a new NBA record for consecutive games with at least one successful 3-point shot. It would be 595. It would be the 595th consecutive game, breaking the previous record held by the Miami Heat. And it's such a weird thing to think about with the 3-point shot because it's such a big part of the game today. But
Mm-hmm.
the relevancy that we've been talking about with a lot of our history, it was really something that people really talked about. What do you think about the state of the 3-point shot in today's NBA game and how it's evolved?
Well, it's certainly here to stay because I was laughing when I looked at
Sure.
that because I was like, who even keeps that stat anymore? Because there's a 3-pointer all the time. And I went and I looked back, and the last NBA game that did not have a made 3-point shot was 2016. So it's not even like the streak is like not even a thing anymore. It's still in
Yeah.
college though. UNLV is the only university that has had a 3-pointer in every single game that since the 3-pointer came into existence. They're the last one left that have still got the streak going. But in terms of the NBA, you're talking teams are shooting 43 pointers in a night, and it I don't see that it's ever going away unless they change the rules. And some
Yeah.
of the people that have had ideas to change the rules on how to mitigate the 3-pointer are interesting, but is sort of an anomaly or an oddity just to read that post because it almost has no relevance of being something that is a thing anymore. Like I said, I don't even think they keep stats of teams' streaks of 3-pointers.
I'm sure they keep stats. They keep stats on everything.
Hmm.
But do you know the last time in the NBA that a team did not attempt a 3-point shot?
Attempt? No. I know the last time that they didn't make one was 2016, but I don't know when the last time they didn't attempt one.
It was 1998. It
Hmm.
was it was 1998 76ers.
Hmm.
And the last time both teams didn't attempt a 3-point shot was 1991.
Wow.
So, but I think you're right. I think it's the spacing and volume and the pace of the game today, and it's about score, score, score. Right? It's not going away. That's um, just part of the game. And it's interesting because since Morris Peterson, who had been the career 3-point leader for the Toronto Raptors, since he retired, there's actually been two other players have passed him up, and both of those players haven't even spent their whole career with Toronto. It was Kyle Lowry and Fred Van Vliet,
Mm-hmm.
or the two that passed him up. Currently, Kyle Lowry has the record for the Toronto 3 points made. So yeah, it's just it's accelerating as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's what's great. What's crazy is the other day I was watching, and there was a 2-on-1 fast break that resulted in a layup, and that was shocking to me. I was like, "Oh my god!" They actually had a 2-on-1, and it was a layup, not a 2-on-1, and it ended up in a 3-point shot from the corner. So it's almost like it was noticeable because a layup on a 2-on-1 fast break was shocking to me. And I loved it because they got 2 points.
Maybe in 20 years we'll be doing this and we'll be talking about the streak for layups ended.
Right.
Layups made in a game.
It'd be like there were no 2-point shots made in the entire game. It was 3-pointers and free throws only. That would be on this day in sports.
So we talked a lot about fundamentals. I know that's a big thing for you in all sports, not just basketball. And it's no secret, and this is not a unique opinion from me. This is most observers of basketball, and at least with the NBA especially, sort of say this, is that fundamentals are on the decline. So has the rise of the 3-point shot, do you think that's really directly correlating to the decrease in fundamentals? Because now you have role players who are just hunting 3-pointers from the corner. They're not really focusing on like a wider skill set.
Yeah, you don't have to get a shot open. Like the shot is almost presented to you. That these 3-pointers are coming from the ball being swung around, and it also comes from offensive rebounds. And there's more offensive rebounds because there's more 3-point shots, which means there's longer rebounds, which means boxing out doesn't necessarily get you a rebound in the same way that it used to when the majority of shots were within 8 to 10 feet. So even now, you can perfectly box somebody out with great fundamentals, and the rebound's still going over your head because it's coming off of a 3-point shot. And then we all know that the best and most open 3-point shot comes off an offensive rebound because the defense is collapsed and the 3-point shooter is wide open at the arc. So it just one thing snowballs down on the other, and guys are getting bigger contracts because they're scoring points, not because they're playing defense. And until defense is valued contractually, it's probably not going to stay. And a lot of these guys are like, it takes too much effort to play defense. It takes my legs away. I need my legs for my 3-point shot, which is unfortunate.
Well, I want to turn to actually our post from yesterday, actually, speaking of defense and scoring and the full package in the NBA, and talk about Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt is still one of my favorite players to discuss because I think the lore behind Wilt Chamberlain is so fantastic at times. There's so many stories about him, which most of them are probably not true or exaggerated, but he has some incredible stories. And so yesterday, the post was in 1960 that Wilt Chamberlain, while he was playing for the Philadelphia Warriors, he set an NBA playoff record by scoring 53 points in a game against Syracuse. And that was a series clinching game. It was a game 3. He also had 22 rebounds that game. And that propelled the Warriors to the Eastern Division Finals, although they would lose eventually to the NBA champions of that year, which was the Boston Celtics. But over those 3 games, Wilt scored 116 points. And it's so incredible to think of the kind of player he was. And I think a lot of people just think about his size and they think about his 100-point game. That's what most people are aware of because that's a round number. And it's just such a hard to really picture anyone scoring 100 points. But he was more than just a scoring machine and a rebound machine, right?
Right. Yeah. There was so much about Wilt. I think Wilt is one of those players that I think a lot of times people talk about, could players from the past, how would they compete in today's NBA? Right. That would be the big question that everyone asks. But I think if you watch Wilt and probably Pete Maravich, those are the two that if you just pull clips from them and watch, you feel like you're watching a modern NBA game.
Yeah.
In a way that you don't feel that way if you look at Jerry West or maybe Bob Cousy or, even Tiny Archibald or George Gervin or one of those guys, that there's sort of a distinct style difference. If you watch Wilt highlights and you feel like you're watching a modern NBA player. And yes, he was 7'1" in an era of guys who mostly were not 7'1", who were 6'7", 6'8", but he has a lot of the skill set of the modern Euro 7-footer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he ran the 100-yard dash in under 11 seconds, the 40-yard in 4.6 seconds. He had a triple jump of over 50 feet. He actually, and I know you're a big fan of track and field, so you probably know this, but he won multiple conference titles for high jump. And he was an excellent passer. And I think the one thing that a lot of people comment, I mean, I was, he played before I was born. But one thing that in reading about him, his IQ and his timing and his understanding of the flow of the game was just so far and above just a lot of other players of the era. So you combine that with his physical skill set, like you said, 7'1", but then his wingspan is 7 to 8 feet. I mean, he could do anything. There was just, he would have, there was stories of him doing races against guards, and he would beat them in full court in a race the length of the court. So if you watch some of the highlights, and I encourage our audience to really pull up some of his own clips, you just see how nimble and flexible and agile he was for such a huge, dominating person. It's like, it's hard to see someone towering over the rest of the court as much as he did, because the size was not even close to what it is in today's NBA, but also seeing him probably one of the most athletic people on the court as well.
There was an urban legend that at a Hollywood party, he once raced Jim Brown and beat Jim Brown. And Jim Brown was so mad, he made him race again, and he beat him again. That's how athletic he was. And I think when you look at, could Wilt play today? Absolutely, 100%. And most people will say, oh, well, he's like Wembanyama. And I would say that's probably as close as you can get in one person, because he has a lot of the blocks that Wembanyama does. But let's not forget, Wilt Chamberlain benched 550 pounds. Right? Wembanyama's not benching 550 pounds. And Wembanyama has still got some growing to do, and he's not nearly the physical specimen that Wilt is. And I think at Wilt, he's more got the strength of Giannis than he does Wemby, but he's got the defensive skill set of Wemby with the physical athleticism and strength of Giannis, with the vision and the passing and the IQ of Jokic. And you put all those three guys together, the best of, and you create this super basketball player. And then you have Wilt Chamberlain. And for me, Wilt will always be, he will be the answer to the who's better, Jordan or LeBron. My answer is Wilt. That Wilt is the beginning of the best basketball player that's ever played. Individually. Now, did he fit necessarily within a team? Not so much. He didn't have as great a talent around him. But I think what would be interesting would be if you could swap Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain and make Bill Russell play in Philadelphia and then LA, or you could make Wilt Chamberlain play on the Celtics. What would the results have been? Because Bill Russell was the better team player. Wilt Chamberlain was the better individual player.
Yeah, and I think on that note, one of the things I think gets overlooked, I think about this a lot with Kareem, who's, to me, that's my GOAT, is Kareem. But hard to argue with Wilt. Is the amount of strain that those players were under, and especially with Wilt being the go-to guy on every play almost. You're going to get beat up badly. And the amount of minutes that he logged, just like Kareem, the amount of minutes he logged, if you look at Kareem's career, is like he had played full seasons almost every game, every season. Wilt, same thing. And I think that's an underrated part of what these guys went through. Bill Russell, that ball is getting spread out, so other players are taking some of that physical strain. But with Wilt, everyone's coming after him. Everyone wants a piece of him. Everyone's slamming into him. He's jumping in and putting himself in the middle of the fray. So I think that's something that definitely should get recognized with players who are really, like you said, they're really the main guy on that team during that
And
era.
on that note, in 1962, he played every minute of every game with the exception of 8 minutes. And that's because he got ejected with 8 minutes left in one game. He averaged 48 and a half minutes per game in a 48-minute game because he not only played the entire game of every game, he also played the entire overtime of all the overtime
Wow.
games. So he averaged half a minute longer than the game
Wow.
playing
That's
that
incredible.
year. Yeah. So
So,
that's insanity.
being such a force he is, and I think all leagues do this, and basketball is famous for this. Making some rule changes that really hurt Wilt,
Mm-hmm.
and those are the changes. A lot of it is what we see now. Our goaltending is one of those that we are familiar with. How they widened the lane from 12 feet to 16 feet. How do you think those changes impacted him, and do you think there's anything that he benefited from sort of that new era of the NBA?
I don't think he benefited from any of it because he was doing things that only he could do, and yeah, I just all of them were designed to make him a less impactful player. And that's something that's been said many times. Is they say that they changed the rules to make it harder for Wilt. They changed the rules to make it easier for Michael and
Yeah.
LeBron. And I think that's really an accurate statement. This thing. That's funny about Wilt Chamberlain is that they were able to get him out of Philadelphia for college, and he went to Kansas to play for Fog Allen, right? When he went to Kansas. So Fog Allen, like the godfather of coaches, right? Fog Allen Fieldhouse is named after him. The original rules of basketball exist at Kansas. Did you know that in the late 50s, that Fog Allen went to a little town in Kansas to get a shooting guard that would complement Wilt Chamberlain so they could play inside outside? It was like going to be one of the first, like, how do we get a really great shooting guard with this beast inside? And he recruited and tried his darndest to get this fellow to come by the name of Eddie Sutton. And Eddie Sutton said, I really, really want to come to Kansas, and I really, really, really want to play with Wilt. But Fog Allen was set to retire, and because freshmen couldn't play, he was only going to have 1 year with Fog Allen after his sophomore year. And so that's why he decided to go to Oklahoma State. But he really, really wanted to go play with Wilt. And the two of them played against each other throughout their college career.
Maybe we can start a new game on these podcasts. We could do, instead of the 5 degrees of Kevin Gator, 5 degrees of basketball or something.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's really funny how this week that worked out because there's so many things that are just connected with each other. Like, oh my God, that and that and that and that. Yeah. And it's all said. But Eddie Sutton and Wilt Chamberlain almost together on the same team. Yep.
Well, speaking of rule changes and I mentioned this happens in a lot of leagues. I want to move on to a sport that you and I love that I feel should be embraced by even more people, not just during the Winter Olympics, but figure skating.
I love figure skating, and I don't care who out there knows. Come at me all you want. I love it.
I love it too, and I wish I could catch more of it. I wish I could go watch it live as much as possible, but Elaine Zayak rule. So in 1982, on March 13th, which was Friday of this week, but in 1982, Elaine Zayak, she was known as a great jumper, and on that day, she nailed 6 triple jumps. 6. And she won gold in ladies singles at the World Championships in Copenhagen. And a lot of people, marveled at her jumping prowess, but there was also a knock against her that some people in the world who followed the sport had, that they felt like, she didn't really have variety in her jumps. They were all kind of the same. And so, for example, in this where she won gold, 4 of her 6 triples were toe loops. And so that the next season, the start of the next figure skating season, the ISU, which is the International Skating Union, the Congress changed the rules to say that a performer may not perform the same kind of jump more than twice, and that the repeated jump must be included as part of a combination or sequence in order for both jumps to receive full credit. And it's called the Zayek rule.
Correct.
And so
she's the Wilt Chamberlain of figure skating. Actually. They made it harder for Elaine Zayak.
And Elaine Zayak could slam dunk a basketball. But no, it's true. And we've seen some rule changes, to be fair. They've done this with other skaters as well, right? There's the age change, and there's been the Zagatova rule change, and there's been some other ones. But yeah, this one was pretty remarkable, and it really took away the best part of her game.
Right, and we've seen figure skating has evolved in how it's not just constructed its scoring system, but how it's constructed its competitions and the way that they have done. Now, they were just coming off of sort of other rule changes. And one of the biggest rule changes was really all throughout the 70s and the 80s, because they're trying to make it more TV friendly. And that's what they were trying to do with the Lanes Act. They wanted to make it more TV friendly, because they wanted not just to be about the jumps, but then it should also be about the artistry, and it should also be about variety, and it should also narrow the gap between the people that can't do 6 and the people that can. And so we want to shrink it and make it more competitive. And they had just come off they had done the compulsory figures. Like, why is it called figure skating, Jeff? It's called figure skating because they used to have to skate in compulsory figures. So they'd be like stars or snowflake patterns or all of these things that they had to skate. And they would judge how well they did that. And that would be the first part of the skating competition. And then the next part would be the short program. And then it'd be the long program. And they found that nobody wanted to watch the compulsory figures. It's not that interesting to watch on TV. You really can't see it, particularly in the non-high def cameras that they had in the 70s and 80s. And so they decided we're going to scrap that. Even though there were a handful of figure skaters who really, made their bank on the compulsory figures, because nobody likes to practice them. So they would get first, second, try to build up a big score, and then they would fall apart. And Elaine Zayak was one of those people that was like, hey, I'm going to use the jumps instead of the compulsory figures. I'm going to use the jumps in order to get ahead and get my points. Bank my points in what I do best. But ultimately, I think it was a good decision when you have somebody that's so far out of the box in a way that you can contain. It's like, oh, they're hitting too many home runs, so we have to tell them they can only hit 2 home runs, and that, like softball, right? Beer league softball, you can only hit 2 balls over the fence, and after that, it's an out. It's not like you can't do that, but I sort of like the way that figure skating has gone to a more transparent, more regimented form of scoring, into where now they'll say, all right, you have these required elements. You can do them in any order you like. They're worth these amount of points. We're going to judge you on the grade of execution of how you do a specific jump or spin that has this start value. And they've really kind of traded all the best things that gymnastics was doing and figure skating, and the two of them have really worked together to create a scoring system that's very much the same in gymnastics as it is in figure skating.
Yeah, one thing I thought was interesting is that triples were really associated with male skaters prior to Zayak. And she was the one who really demonstrated that women could incorporate this in part of her game. And I don't know if this is just a hunch on my part, but it seems like the women's skaters have become more popular than the men's, and I don't know if it's the type of skater or the presentation or whatever the case is. But I wonder if it all traces back to Zayak, where it's starting to incorporate a more interesting, program into what they do. What do you think about that? Any thoughts
Well,
there?
it's certainly become more athletic, and I think
Yeah,
that
for sure.
female figure skaters, at least throughout the United States and Canada, and probably from most of Europe and certainly in Japan, that they've always been more marketable.
Hmm.
And I think that just the audience is either been primarily female and they relate to it more, or uh, the audience that's male is drawn to that's more artistic than on the male side. But I also think that the International Skating Union pushes that female skaters far more than they ever push their male skaters. And so part of it is a decision by the ISU that that's who they're going to promote. And so since you always follow who you're more familiar with.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that has is probably what the reasoning is. But it has gotten significantly more athletic, and it has gotten to where like if you do a double now, so you don't even get any points for a double. You must do a triple in this spot. That's what happened to Amber Glenn. You must do a triple. If it's not a triple, it's 0 points. And
Yeah.
that's why she got behind in the short program at this past Olympics, because she didn't do a triple and it cost her a medal. But no, I think figure skating has certainly gone in the right direction in terms of how they've chosen to score it and the transparency in which they've chosen to score it, and they've done a good job in adapting how they do it. Lane Zach, you mentioned Alita Zagitova. And
Yeah.
the rules that they changed for her because there were too many jumps in the short program.
Hmm.
And it was giving one skater a huge advantage. And the question then becomes like, do you want one skater to dominate, or do you want it to be sort of a fair playing field? And what do you want the competitions to look like in the future? And what do you want the next generation to focus on? Does it all become about landing one jump, or does it become about mastering a number of elements?
Right. But before we move on from Zayak, I wanted to mention, I think we'd be failing at part of our job here if we didn't mention why she got into skating in the first place, and really it was to overcome this horrific accident that she encountered as a 2-year-old, where she lost several toes in a lawnmower accident, and she really used that to propel her and really be a leader to other people who may have suffered such injuries, and can show you can rise above such your maybe a disability or an injury, and really kind of be a good role model for something like that. So I find that remarkable, that
Mm-hmm.
she was that's what really sort of gave her the fire to be a competitor at the highest levels.
Yeah, absolutely. She was a great role model on off the ice, and I think somebody, unfortunately, because she doesn't have the Olympic gold medal, is somebody that's been overlooked a little bit
Hmm.
in the history of U.S. figure skating, because there has been so much success at the Olympic level. But she's certainly somebody that you can't tell the story of American figure skating without Elaine Zayak.
Yeah, and it's nice they've recognized her, at least in the U.S., and she's been inducted into the U.S. Figure Skating Hall of Fame. And it was back in 2003, so I think she's been recognized, if not on the international stage, definitely in the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. halls of figure skating. But speaking about role models, and this is something that's a little more recent, the She Believes Cup,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Yeah, it
something
just
that
wrapped
wasn't
up.
started that long ago. Yeah, yeah, and it started only in 2016 was the first
Mm-hmm.
inaugural She Believes Cup, and um, the in that one, in the inaugural finals, it was the U.S. Faced Germany, and two of the most famed uh, female soccer players in U.S. history, Alex Morgan and Hope Solo, were on that team. And Alex Morgan had the equalizer goal. And Hope Solo, even though it was 2-1, was the final score in the U.S. beat Germany. Hope Solo shut out Germans in the second half. And that was a exciting game, but it also was something that served as really a template or an example of how uh, women's sport can really be elevated. I believe they've been getting bigger and bigger crowds every year that they've held it. In 2025, it was held in Atlanta, and they had 50,000 for a game. TNT said, which was the network that carried it, they had 5.6 million viewers in 2026. So it's been one of these things that's only a few years old, but it's growing, and it's been a role model for female athletes, especially girls soccer players.
Mm-hmm. It's something that they decided to do because they wanted to maintain a share of the market in non-World Cup years.
Mm-hmm.
And so there aren't, and haven't been a ton of women's events throughout the calendar in non-Olympic or non-World Cup years. There's the qualification process. That's it. You have the Pan Am Games every couple of years, or the World University Games, but there's really not a ton. And the way that the women's program was implemented at that time, there was no domestic league for women to play in, at least here in the U.S. And that was part of the like equal pay rise up that happened. A few years of them saying, well, we deserve X amount of dollars for our World Cup fee, right? Part of what the women's players had agreed to in their collective bargaining agreement is that they would be employees of USA Soccer, and that way they would get retirement plans, and they would get medical plans. All these things that are usually covered on the men's side by by their club team. But since there was no club team, this was a way to provide all of those things. And so USA Soccer was like, all right, well, we have this national team, and we have them all the time because they're USA Soccer employees. They're not like the men's team where we have to get them and gather them and bring them in from their club team just for a specific event. Let's find ways to get them out there and to get them in front of cameras and to have events for them and their talents to be seen. And what resulted was the She Believes Cup. And I said, now it's in its 10th year, and has been a sort of a wildly successful way to each year make sure that team is in front of cameras and playing games and growing the sport.
Yeah, and I think that they were really smart in how they put it together to make it this very prestigious event. How they bring in the top, I believe it's the top 10 sort of international teams for this tournament every year, and it's really attracted a lot of viewers. One thing that you and I always talk about is sports are great and the rules matter, and we want to make it a fair playing field as best as possible, and you want to have all the structure, but it's also entertainment, and they have to think about how they're going to present it to an audience. And they were really smart in how they've intentionally induced this level of prestige with it. There's been a bit of a ripple effect too, where they've been able to attract a wider audience because they've been doing things outside the sport, such as promoting STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to attract girls and women to just different events that the She Believes platform is attached to. So I think it's a kind of a multi-level marketing strategy where they're able to reach in these different sectors and bring more viewers into their sport.
Yeah, it's been really successful. It just wrapped up. The format is very simple. There are 4 teams. Each plays each other, and then at the end there is a winner. That's why in this case that we had when USA was playing Germany, if they tied, it went to one of the tiebreakers, and Germany held the tiebreaker. So if Germany had tied USA on this particular day, they would have won the She Believes Cup. Team USA needed to win outright. That's why Hope Solo being able to have a blank sheet in the second half was so important. But as you had said, it's been a template, and we've seen USA Hockey do this because they have that rivalry series with Canada. And the problem that USA Hockey has is they don't have anybody to play other than Canada. They're still waiting for the development of hockey in the rest of the world to come up to the level of USA and Canada. And it's been a lot easier in soccer with the rest of the world to find teams that can rise up and be competitive. It's competitive in Germany, Brazil, Mexico, the United Kingdom, France, Canada. They all have really good women's soccer teams, Spain. So there's been a more of a group to pull from in order to make this event and other events that are similar to it around the world. And we'll see if it expands beyond, more than just the 4 teams.
Yeah, thanks for correcting me on the number of teams. I think I was thinking of who they drew from, not how many teams were in the tournament. But okay, the last, I wanted to move on to our final day that we talked about, and actually that was posted today. And this is about horse racing. And so this actually takes us back to 1952 at Gulfstream Park in Hallandale Beach. The inaugural running of the Florida Derby took place. The winner was Sky Ship, who went off at 11-1 odds and ended up winning the Florida Derby. And actually, the Florida Derby has become really an important part of the prep for the Kentucky Derby. And although the Sky Ship did not run in the 1952 Kentucky Derby, the more important thing is that the event really opened the door to success for the Kentucky Derby and horse racing in general.
Mm-hmm. And this is a really sort of seminal moment in horse racing in that they started to realize in right around the 50s and 60s that horse racing needed more cohesion within it. The problem with horse racing is funny because it's the same problem with boxing, right? There's no universal oversight. All the tracks are kind of independent and all of them are sort of run by state laws and regulations, and they don't necessarily share information and rules and have some sort of cohesion so that what happens in Florida is beholden to what happens in California. They're entirely separate entities. And the major horse races, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, Belmont, had existed sort of outside of this, that they were these sort of prestigious events, but it was getting complicated as to how do you get to go? How do you get to go to the Kentucky Derby? Why don't I get to go because I'm a really good horse that runs in Florida? Why don't I get to go? Or I'm a really good horse that runs in California. Why don't I get to go? And there needed to be a system put in place in order to take this large number of horses that you have and pare it down into the horses that can qualify and be into the Kentucky Derby. And it began with the Florida Derby being like, we're going to run horses here that may or may not be in the Kentucky Derby, but we're going to sort of weed them out. And that process began with the Florida Derby, not in an official capacity, but in the prestige of the event, to where these horses are saying, hey, we want to go. It's a big payday. Let's go to the Florida Derby. And, that morphed its way into some of the other big races that have come around. The Santa Anita Derby was one of those that has said, hey, we were running, in the 20s and 30s and 40s, but we want to be a part of this process as well. And the Bluegrass Stakes, the Wood Memorial, so that each one of these tracks is having a day very much like the Florida Derby. And it's been really smart for horse racing to create these preps, create these win in your ends, create these point systems that get to the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, wasn't it added to the Road to the Kentucky Derby sort of series that they've been holding as the lead up to the Kentucky Derby?
Yeah, and that grew out of how popular races like the Florida Derby was. I don't think that the Florida Derby, when it was created, or the Santa Anita Derby was, hey, this is going to be, we're going to build towards the Kentucky Derby. I think they all sort of thought, well, we're going to maybe rival the Kentucky Derby, and we're going to, but it wasn't really seen that way by the people that ended up running it. I know the impetus for the Santa Anita Derby was, hey, let's get eyeballs on this West Coast track that nobody in the East is paying any attention to. We're going to have the biggest purse that's ever been given at a horse race, and everybody's going to come out to your track here in California, and people are going to put eyeballs on it that didn't even know Santa Anita existed. And so all of these tracks that said, hey, we need to have a big day like the Kentucky Derby, and we need to make our track relevant. And all of that in the end morphed into what we have today, which is the road to the Kentucky Derby. But so it was always funny because it's like anything else when it first started, and like these posts that you always have from the 40s and 50s, and just how weird and different it was from what we know of sports. This horse was never supposed to be in the race, the horse that won, Skyship. It ended up, there was a scratch. The Flamingo Stakes winner, Charlie McAdams, scratched, and it opened up a spot, and it was selected from one of 24 horses that were on the waiting list to get into this race. Okay. But the thing that's funny is there were only 14 stalls in the starting gate, and there were 18 horses in the race. So 4 of them had to start outside of the starting gate with no gate. They just lined up next to the starting gate, and then they dropped a rope and they ran. Something that would never, ever happen now. Now it would just be like, no, there are 14 gates, there are 14 horses. But not so much in 1952.
Well, and I was thinking about when you were talking about all these different states and these different federations or these different agencies that run these different, but now they've been doing a lot more coordination, right? Gulfstream and Churchill are coordinating on promotion, so it offers like cross promotion opportunities, and it offers them the ability to build these narratives so that they have something to talk about going into the Kentucky Derby.
They do, but the problem still is that the Kentucky Racing Association is what monitors Churchill, and the Florida Racing Association monitors Gulfstream. And even though they're owned by the same company, the 2 racetracks, they're beholden to 2 different licensees. It's not federally overseen. It's the same. It's the same problem, like you said, that boxing has, is that the WBC and the IBF, they have different rules, and they have different people that are in charge, and they have different belts. And yes, you're boxing, but you're not. And then you have the Nevada State Athletic Commission and the New York State Athletic Commission and all of these that oversee boxing in the same way that they oversee horse racing. And there's no unification, no antitrust like Major League Baseball oversees all of the teams regardless of what state they're in. And it's funny that it's horse racing and boxing, because horse racing and boxing were, they were the 2 biggest sports in the 20s and 30s. It was horse racing, boxing, and baseball. And that was what pro sports were. And then baseball found a way to have all of their teams under one umbrella, right? And boxing and horse racing did not. They did not see the future. They saw, we're going to take care of ourselves. We're all on our own. And then they found themselves in this predicament of, okay, how are we going to make ourselves relevant?
So what you're saying in reality is it's not really about better media narratives, just more opportunities for people to bet on their horses and gamble.
That is also true. That is the only thing that's sort of overseen is simulcast racing, right, which is and a whole other thing, because now you can go to West Virginia and you can bet on the track in Oklahoma.
Oh, right. Of course, they figured that one out. Right?
They figured that part out, right? So there's still federal oversight, but there's still like, but you can have slot machines in West Virginia, but can you have them in Oklahoma if you're not on a reservation? And that what it all comes down to is everybody's got their hand in the pot, and they're trying to figure out how to use it. But the Florida Derby was really it was a beginning to what we would see come 30 years later. And all of those preps right now are underway, and they'll be going all the way until about the second week of April before we get ready for the Kentucky Derby.
Well, the Kentucky Derby's on my sports bucket list. I'd love to see it sometime.
It is fantastic. I've been to the Derby, and I've been to the Preakness, and I've been to the Belmont, and I've been to the Breeders' Cup. And there's nothing like the Kentucky Derby. If you've not been, go. Just go. You don't need to know anything about what's happening. I would only say 2 things. 1, wear a hat. It's real. If you don't have one, people are going to look at you. So wear a hat. And 2, learn how to bet before you get there and before you get in line and start holding everybody up, because you don't know the terminology. Learn.
I want to go and see I think you told me once about the people running along the porta potties, or Is that at the Kentucky?
That was at the Preakness. That's at the Preakness. And yeah, so they have porta potty races where people jump on the top of the porta potties and they run down the length of the porta potties against somebody else, and people throw full beer cans at them trying to knock them out.
Right.
Spectacular. Spectacular. You know what's funny about the Preakness is they almost moved it to Gulfstream Park where the Florida Derby is because they were having issues at Pimlico. And Pimlico is going under a renovation. So for 2 years, they're going to run it at Laurel Park. But it was almost at Gulfstream, and they ended up not wanting to go to Gulfstream because they were afraid that it would stay at Gulfstream. And so they wanted it to stay in Maryland. And so they're going to Laurel Park for the next 2 years.
All right. Well, that's, as always, fantastic conversation with you, Clayton. That covers it for this week in history. Next week, we'll have another show. We'll recap next week's history. I want to encourage everyone to go on our socials and like, follow, subscribe, comment, share. We love sharing history with everyone and hope that you, as the audience member, loves sharing it as well. So please spread the word. But Clayton, as always, nice chatting. We'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thanks, Jeff.
All right.